Welcome, Father Jeffrey. Welcome to all our viewers and our listeners and all those who are participating today. Father Jeffrey, how was your dinner?
Served with love.
Wonderful. That's the best. Well, today we're talking about food. We're talking about faith. We're talking about fasting. All of those questions, all of those extremely fun questions. And we have as a special guest today, Rita Madden. And I'm going to read a little biography, not a full biography, just a little bio. And then we'll bring Rita on and we can talk about food, which is one of my favorite things in this world and one of my favorite topics. Okay, here we go. Rita Madden is the nutrition director for Mediterranean Wellness, a company that focuses on sensible weight loss and management and chronic disease prevention and management. She completed her graduate work in public health nutrition at Loma Linda University. She has a podcast on the subject of food, health, and the Eastern Orthodox faith on Ancient Faith Radio. She also conducts workshops on this subject matter around the country, as in the United States, but now in Canada too. To learn more about her workshops, please visit ritafoodfasting.wordpress.com. I'll put the link right here for everybody. Rita is devoted to helping people form a healthy relationship with food. Please welcome Rita to the Enacting the Kingdom live stream. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is exciting for me to be here.
Tuning in all the way from Honolulu, is that right?
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, welcome. This is now, is Honolulu a different continent technically? I don't know. It's not even a continent. It's just islands out there somewhere.
Right.
Okay. Well, before we dive into some of the subject matter, Rita, would you actually, we're going to do our plugs at the beginning here. Would you mind telling people where they can find you and if the topic interests them, where they can pursue it further?
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you. So basically, I just do podcasts, and prior to COVID, I was doing in-person workshops utilizing the Eastern Orthodox tradition as a way to help us care for our modern day health. And slowly the in-house workshops are coming back, but now I do have some available workshops online. And if you go to ritafoodfaithfasting.wordpress.com, I think Rita Food Faith Fasting. So I think we have to put faith in there. And then that will take you, right to the website, and then from there you can see some of the online programming.
Food Faith Fasting. Here, I got it. Did I get it right now?
There we go.
Rita Food Faith Fasting.wordpress.com. Wonderful.
As we'll learn this evening, the faith is an important element in that triad.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, maybe that's a good place to start, and we'll start with you, Rita. But the question is, what do we get wrong about fasting? Right? What do we get wrong about fasting?
Right. So even just talking earlier, I think a lot of times we have to recognize, the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And we hear this in so many different aspects when it comes to our worship and our tradition. But fasting is one of those aspects. And it's funny. I feel like when fasting times come around, we talk about recipes more than any other time of year. We're trading recipes, discussing food. And it's kind of, we have to just be cautious about it. As the Holy Fathers tell us, there are 3 arms to fasting. So we hear the word fasting, and in our modern day approach to eating and living, we think no food. But we always know that it's like a 3-fold process, with fasting including the prayer, the almsgiving, and then the food. And so I think a lot of times what we're doing wrong with the fasting is we just so focus on the food. And, we hear many of our spiritual fathers, mothers, the early church fathers telling us if we're just looking at the food, then really it's just a diet plan. And so we really want to make sure that we have all the aspects included. I mean, we hear St. John Chrysostom in many of his teachings saying, if you are going to not forgive your brother, it's better for you to eat the meat. And so I think that is one thing that we are focusing on that we could redirect our attention to, is the 3 arms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in I grew up in an Orthodox household, and the idea of eating the correct things at the right time of the year are so ingrained. The idea of like having meat in Lent is so it gets under my skin so much. But very often, we're often taught things like, well, don't deny hospitality. If you go to somebody's house and they don't know anything about your fasting or anything like that, and they offer you something, you don't say anything, and you receive it, and you don't make a show of yourself. Something as simple as that has always been very difficult for me personally. I've enjoyed making a show of it, at least.
Mm.
Yeah. Father Jeffrey, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think what you're recounting there is a fairly common experience, but I wonder how many people get that feeling about that I just couldn't imagine not going to Vespers, or I couldn't imagine not saying my prayers or reading the scriptures, or indeed doing some act of charity and almsgiving and so forth. It's funny how we get so exercised about this particular discipline and yet neglect the others in an odd way. Whereas, Rita's absolutely right. In fact, the fathers make a direct link between the point of fasting and those other things, right? So that, there's a certain amount of investment of time and of your life and caring for your family that goes into food preparation. Everything from gathering the food to preparing it, to serving it, to cleaning up. I mean, there's a lot of time involved in that. And the rules themselves are kind of directed at the purpose of reducing that amount of time and the amount of investment in terms of money in that, so that you can free up time and money to do the prayer and the almsgiving, right? So they go hand in hand. It's not just there's 3 things that you can do, we recommend them, but rather they directly connect, one to the other. And so things like, I mean, ultimately the rules of fasting surround things like no oil, because you're not actually cooking. You're not taking the time to cook. You're supposed to xerophagy, dry eating, dried fruits and nuts and so forth, which take no time at all to prepare. Now that's at a fairly high level of discipline, but the point is there that it's all about reducing the amount of time you think and spend time doing the preparation of the meals and serving them, so that you can precisely get on to pray and do almsgiving and so forth. So in modest ways we should be able to recover that, even if we're not doing xerophagy as such. Can we find putting on a vegetable soup on the hob and leaving it there over the fasting period, and you just add to it with new fresh vegetables all the time. It's a very easy way of keeping a pot going, serving the family with good fresh local produce, because at this time of year particularly, we have a lot of those winter vegetables that are coming in that make really hearty soups, and I mean, that's a really healthy way to eat, and it's a really low time consuming way to eat, right? And there's always something on the go. And so that's the kind of habit I think people should look to form, rather than find, okay, what's the best way to make chocolate cake without eggs or whatever, and go to these elaborate schemes to kind of mask their fasting.
Right. Yeah. I just, to comment on that, a dear spiritual father in my life, one time he said, you make a pot of lentil soup at the beginning of the week and you eat it all week long. And, with my nutrition background, this is how I see such a beauty of our tradition, just outlining everything for us. We know that when we fast, we pray. And so when we are kind of starting to just really be more attentive to our eating and how much we're maybe wanting to grab things before meals. If we approach a meal feeling hungry, there's an expression, hunger is the best sauce. So that lentil soup that you made 3 days ago, if you approach that meal hungry, you are going to be so excited to eat it. So, to your point, it kind of does, if we can do these techniques, it really simplifies the process to open up more time to attend the many additional services that are offered, to, pray in our prayer corner, have prayer time with our family, and so on and so forth. So
I think one of the things that we get wrong about the fasting is it starts with getting wrong about the feasting somehow with our non-fasting periods. If we got our relationship with food in a kind of more of an equilibrium, in a better balance, and we actually understood how foods work, and what things to buy in season and to prepare, and how to eat economically but well, how to just use the wonderful produce of God's bountiful earth effectively. If we got that relationship right, I think that would translate into better fasting somehow. But it's the fact that we live badly with food a lot of the time that we can't possibly get fasting right. I mean, I lament the fact that almost every fasting period I watch parishioners of mine grow obese. Because what are they doing? They're reaching for, they're substituting meat, or dairy, and they're for carbs, just potatoes or breads and other things, because and all those starches, because they're fast foods, right? But
Right,
that's not
right.
the point. They don't know
Yep,
about pulses and grains
absolutely.
and how do you combine them to get a good balanced diet. So I almost think that the first job here is that in almost every community and parish, I've
Mhm.
always had this idea in mind that we should have like community lessons in shopping and farmers
Yeah,
markets and cooking,
yes.
because people don't have those skills anymore. A lot of
No,
people in the family doesn't have it. I watch people's shopping carts at the
right.
grocery store, and they're just loaded with all the interior of the store, right? I think
Yeah,
you should only shop at the exterior, the produce, the fresh
yep.
dairy, fresh meat, etc. It's all those processed foods that people just laden their trolleys with, and I think what's going on in their homes, they don't know how to cook, and so of
Hmm.
course you come to fasts and it makes no sense and there's no way to even
Absolutely.
begin. So I think there's all a food education programs
Yeah,
somehow that has to start from the
yeah.
ground up, which is why I'm really excited to have Rita here with us, because I think she represents
Mm.
the best of what that could look like, right? The
Oh,
kinds of things that you exemplify.
it. You're just saying so many things that are so speaking to my heart because so many times I'll go to a grocery store and I'll see what's in someone's cart and I just want to empty it out and start it all over again because really we've just created so much confusion around food. It's interesting. I had many talks with people in the past and they said, we were talking about how health almost has become an idol in our culture. And there's this food that's marketed as healthy and that food's marketed as healthy that we have just gotten so far away from the basics. And, when you were talking, it just made me think of like how we have holy tradition and this has been passed down to us, but we used to have this with our eating, and our
Mm.
traditions would be passed down, recipes would be passed down. Our grandmas and babushkas and tetas were all teaching us how to make traditional dishes, and now I'll talk to so many people and they don't even know how to make their traditional dishes, which is so sad to me because this is a break in our, like, again, way of just nourishing our bodies. And so we have all these foods now that again are quick and easy, that are marketed as healthy, but again they're kind of actually designed, a lot of money is scientifically spent on designing how to get us to come back more and more for these foods. And so a beautiful thing, and like I was, well, we were having a discussion privately, we just moved into a new space and I was talking to the spiritual father of our community, and it was really touching to me. He said, because maybe, he said, Rita, when we get all settled, we could start offering classes to the community at large, as a service to the community, teaching them ways to care for their health through eating. Because especially where I live, we're seeing many health disparities. And how is that affecting the family homes? If people are not being nourished well, how does that affect their mood? And then their mood, translates in how you might treat each other. And so much can go back to this basic thing of just simple nuts and bolts of how to feed ourselves nutritiously, in basic, simple ways, like you were saying earlier, mentioning earlier.
Hmm.
So,
What I've
Yeah.
found the most difficult in growing up in the church was that what I found the most difficult about fasting times was that I seemed to go from a place of unintentionality regarding my diet to a
mm,
place of extreme intentionality,
mm,
right? And that was the tough part. And then Bright Week shows up, and then I start feeling awful because I'm filling my mouth with all this food I probably shouldn't, whatever it is, fast food or candy or things like that, because I've moved from being very intentional to being unintentional,
mm,
right? And I think Father Jeffrey, to your point there, I think it, we need to treat our quote unquote regular time as still our food needs to be intentional. We
mm,
need to move from one kind of intention to a different kind of
mm.
intention, or something like that. Father Jeffrey, you wanted to?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, here's a thought that, I mean, if we truly, as we ought to do, believe that we are body souls and not in some
Mhm,
sort of Platonic sense, immortal souls trapped within some temporary body that can be just discarded and not really cared for. But if we're properly
mhm,
body souls created by God as this, whole being that we need to look after, we should spend as much time traditioning the things which care for the body as we do for the soul, right? Because these things work together, and we our ultimate belief is the resurrection of the body, not some sort of floating off into heaven on a cloud just as a soul and so forth. So this traditioning of all of the things around, how we properly look after one another and how we properly look after our bodies and everything, that's vital to us. And in fact, all the stuff that we can see today, which has caused such misery and anxiety and allergies and food intolerances and all of these things, which are 100% the result of us getting away from a proper, earth-based, God-given diet and so forth. This is kind of like heresy, right? We easily jump to that category as Orthodox when we think an idea might be wrong, right? Just a mental concept or construct, that's heresy. We'll avoid that. And yet we'll go and we'll shop heretically, right? And we'll eat heretically, because that ultimately is, it's going against, and violating, this temple of the Holy Spirit that we have in our bodies. And I mean, we ought really to be taking this very, very seriously indeed. And it shouldn't just be a few lone voices, making this case. But what a wonderful, and just to Rita's point there about, could we be doing this for the community at large? This is part of our evangelical proclamation to the world that God loves all of creation and is bountiful, and we are good within it as long as we live, sympathetically with it and in harmony with it. And that starts with what we put on our plates and in our mouths and in our families' stomachs. So I think this is a very, very important issue. And again, thank you for raising the banner on this. But I think every Orthodox community should be known as a place where these things are being looked after and traditioned and cared for, and the world served by that.
I am, if it's okay, I'd like to just interject this, because it's a very, it's just so humbling to me to see, how God's always working. But when way back in the day, when I started this work on really looking at how the Eastern Orthodox tradition just completely outlines a way for us to care for our health, it was funny because we were entering a fasting period, and I saw all these unhealthy foods starting to appear. We took out butter, so margarine came. We took out cream, so coffee mate came. And, so I went to the spiritual father of the community, and just rightfully so, I was like, Father, we have to do something. We cannot let people eat this way during a fast. This is worse for their health than not fasting. And he looks at me and he said, Rita, for our next adult education session, I want you to research everything that the Holy Fathers teach us about health. And that's how I started on all this. And, I thought it was so funny. Here I am complaining, and I get an assignment. And glory be to God, because, just seeing all that has been offered to us. It's hard for me not to get chills talking about it, because to your point, Father Jeffrey, everything that I hear people coming to me about, wanting to set up an appointment about, I think, wow, Saint Seraphim of Sarov has already outlined a way for us to be attentive to our eating, like you were saying, Father Yuri, at all times, not necessarily just during the fast. And to tie on to something you said earlier that I found so beautiful again is, we see how our traditions outlined, and many times after a major feast. So now we're going to be, the Holy Nativity fast, and we'll have the 12 days of Christmas where we don't fast. We go from Nativity to Epiphany with no fasting. And I thought, what wisdom, because many times it's easy to think this is the only day I'm going to be able to have all these wonderful foods. And then it turns into a moment of just a lack of attentiveness with eating. But when I tell people, I'm like, you have 12 days to kind of readjust your body from fasting to now introducing these foods. Utilize this as a time to allow it to be an attentive time with your food. And, we always hear that, God is everywhere present and filling all things. And how can we utilize that time of feasting to make Christ present at the table at every meal, make him, present with taking our time with our food, and then not going too crazy at once, because this is when you see people feeling really uncomfortable after fasting, is when, you add in all these foods that you've given out, too quickly. And so I kind of feel like those opportunities of no fasting can be a beautiful time to, again, practice these healthy aspects of attentive eating, nutritious eating, but still, enjoying the foods that God has made. the akathist of Thanksgiving. I just think that akathist service is so beautiful. And one of my favorite parts is, glory to thee for every taste of berry and fruit. And, it always humbles me when I'm, rushing and I'm like, I just, you know what? It just passed the taste buds. But God implanted us with those to experience him through, our senses.
Yeah, and I find that example is a particularly interesting one because even things like berries are seasonal, right? So there's in addition to the fasting and then the feasting and that rhythm and the seasonality to that, which is so wonderful and it gives us such structure in our lives. I mean, food itself is seasonal, right? And we've gotten away from that too often. I lived in France for quite a few years, and this has not been lost. I mean, food is such a fundamental and artisanal and craft part of the culture at every level. It doesn't matter what economic level you're at, and food is really important. I mean, you see, if you ever want to know where to go to eat lunch, if you're in kind of rural France, follow the truck drivers and the construction workers at lunchtime, because they'll go and take a 3-hour lunch in an out of the way place, and they know where there's good local produce and everything. But in terms of the seasonality, I mean, we knew almost to the day on our calendars when we were living there that when such and such would be available, and it was only available there for like maybe 3 days or a week or whatever. There were certain melons in the part of the France where we were, like, it was just the melon days, and everybody just ate melons, and that was wonderful. And then you waited another year till you had them again, and it was so much better for having them. And not that you binged on them when you had them, because ultimately that produce was for giving away, and people knew how to prepare them and preserve them and bake them into things and everything. But the point was, the whole thing was oriented to something that God has set up, for us. It's such a beautiful rhythm. Like, these are people that aren't particularly religious now in any other respect, but they still had that connection to the land, to the terroir, as they call it. I mean, so that first taste of a berry when it's in season is it's to die for, really. And you just, and that there's something kind of all-consuming about that it reminds me of that, on Pascha night when you're feasting together as a parish, that you've waited for that makes it all the more worth it somehow. You've invested the time, not only of kind of growing and preparing things, but of waiting to actually consume it is something very special indeed. And we've lost that. We're in a society where you go and you press a button in it, and the machine gives you something, or you order something online, it can be there the same day, right? We're not used to waiting. And this is really important for us, I think, as human beings, to slow down and wait.
We do have a question from one of our viewers. Avalon C says, "Hi, what does someone that is vegan do during periods of fasting? Thank you." I think this question reflects one of the questions that I was going to ask about, Rita, which is, the Orthodox Church has these fasting rules, right? There's these rules that are put in place, but then again, all of us have unique nutritional needs, and we're learning even more about that as modern science progresses, that we all have different makeups and needs in terms of food. So if someone basically lives a vegan lifestyle and only eats vegan food, then a fasting time comes around and I guess there's nothing for them to do. I don't know. How would you begin approaching this question?
Well, I think that's a question for Father, because I think that would be, maybe you could speak about, I mean, I think, again, it depends on the relationship with the person and their spiritual father too, because maybe the spiritual father may see that they need to add something to their prayer roll or something like that. So I'll let Father speak to that. But to your point, in the fact that we do all, God sometimes thinks for our salvation, we might need to have an illness that has us eating a certain way. Whatever it is, we all sometimes do have to eat in different ways. But the reason we see the foods the way they are, because there's been discussion like, well, how come we can crack crab legs, but we can't eat a can of tuna fish? That doesn't kind of add up. And it's interesting to kind of see why all the foods were chosen. And I think it's important to understand that there's something to me, it's very interesting, because we see modern science trying to explain it. But the Holy Fathers knew something about foods that contain blood. So animal derived foods, except for shellfish. Shellfish are a bloodless creature. They recognize that foods of this kind can kind of excite the passions. And, I mean, I can have a piece of toast, but I have butter on that toast. It's a completely different piece of toast, right? And so they were trying to choose foods that help us subdue the passions. So utilizing something physical to help us deal with our passions. And if we subdue something, then this can help with that. But another thing to keep in mind that was also in choosing them is that they were considered very humble foods. And we see many monastics when they, become tonsured, they're choosing their one of their vows is a life of poverty, and so many of these foods are considered humble foods. In fact, my a spiritual father, he's a bishop now, I should say, but he used to tell me, the shellfish used to be what was fed to prisoners, right? And now here we are. It's kind of hard for me to crack crab legs because that's one of my favorite foods on the planet when I'm fasting. But, that kind of gives us kind of just a little bit of the history of why different foods were chosen. And so I just kind of wanted to mention that because, again, we all have to eat differently. And then that allows us to kind of work with our spiritual father to determine what it is. We see economia and this flexibility, but again, all guided by our spiritual father. So instead of making up what our diet should look like, we should really go to our spiritual father about this and receive his guidance and obediences about it.
Well, Father Jeffrey, coming to you as the
Yeah,
spiritual
so
father.
Rita's 100% right about that. And I mean, just to even add to the, why shellfish were allowed. I mean, we read about fishermen cleaning their nets, even in the Gospels. Well, what were they cleaning out? They were cleaning out the stuff they didn't want, which was the bottom feeding shellfish, right? They thought that was a real nuisance. They were just trying to catch fish. So it is a bit obscene, I would have to say, for people to kind of, go and have like a lobster thermidor, many course meal with all the trimmings and everything in Lent, claiming that this is somehow in keeping with the spirit of the fast. So, I mean, I would just return to that point that I said earlier that, I mean, if you look through these rules, I mean, Father Alexander Schmemann would often talk about, in the liturgy and looking at the Typikon. I mean, it's not just about following the letter of that, but kind of understanding why were the services set up the way they were? What's the kind of fundamental ordo that underlies this? Well, what's the ordo of the fasting rules that we find in the Typikon? Well, that thing about eating more simply, applies. So to your vegans, right? I mean, there's nothing to say that someone who's a vegan can't eat sumptuously, right? If you know what you're doing, you can create rather luxurious meals indeed, and it can take an awful long time to prepare them, right? It can involve a lot of visiting of shops and gathering the ingredients and taking hours to prepare, different things. And what I would recommend to somebody is that if that is your lifestyle and you're living as a vegan all the time, there's nothing in Orthodox theology that insists that you eat meat. Although I think Rita has spoken before about there's a monastery somewhere where the monks at least once a year eat meat just to prove that point, that it's not that meat is bad or anything. But if you're living as a vegan all the year, there's still a rhythm of feasting and fasting to be had, right? You can prepare all those lovely and sumptuous, luxurious meals with lots of the rich oils that you like. I mean, here the point about oil is not, well, olive oil bad and other, kind of weird oils, and particularly things that are synthetic being good. It just means it's about the time that you spend preparing something, right? So you would do that in the feasting periods and have wonderful meals, but when it comes to fasting periods, find a simpler way of preparing food and gathering it. And maybe you're making that big meal on a Sunday that you eat throughout the week so that you can free up an awful lot of time for things. So I would lean into that kind of purposefulness of the thing. And if you are having shellfish, whoever you are, like make it a kind of humble presentation and way of doing it, and not, oh my goodness, look what we are allowed to eat. It's some of the most expensive food that you can buy today. So where's the point of freeing up the money for almsgiving when you're buying all of these expensive foods? I've said to Father Yuri before, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, far better to eat a minute steak couple dollars from the grocery store, cooks in a minute, so it satisfies all the requirements of time and preparation and freeing up money for giving to the poor. If you then did go and pray and give to alms, then to prepare a 4-hour meal out of fasting ingredients, so-called, right? As Rita quite rightly points out, this is to be implemented very locally in a community with one spiritual father, by family, and the overall watchword with fasting, which we read in all of the ancient accounts and all of the patristic writings, is do not put your eyes on someone else's plate, right?
Yes.
So regardless of what's going on, you're focused only on your own discipline. Yes, we are ultimately working to the same rule. I think there's something beautiful about that. We're not making up our own rules. The Western tradition of saying, well, I'll give up this or I'll give up that, Netflix or chocolate or something. There's something lacking in the community basis of it, because we are one body, right? And we're all looking after members of one body, but nevertheless, as different members of one body, we have a different consideration. So whether it's health reasons or our normal diet that we're relating to, or indeed just our wherewithal as a family, those are all considerations to take to our spiritual father.
Rita, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything else, if you want to expand on any of that, or I could take it in another direction as well. It's up to you.
I think you could go in another direction, but I love how you said, we are called to do this in community. And so I do think there is something to be said too about, we were talking about all this recipe discussion, but it doesn't hurt to, like, as a community, to everyone trade some simple recipes. I mean, and the reason I wanted to say this is because I have a lot of people that have just been received into the Orthodox tradition. And like Father Jeffrey was saying, no one needs to look at how anyone else is fasting. And there's the spiritual father that received them may have said, okay, just for this fast, you just cutting out dairy is enough, and you're going to kind of build on it. But, to help the community stick to the fast, it might be, okay, what are you struggling with? Or how about I make a pot of soup and I'm going to make extra and share with you, and then you share with me. When we're looking at fasting in community, it really does change that, because we are one body and we're encouraged to help each other keep the fast. I know with my own parish, we always try to do something on a level of almsgiving together, whether it is doing a food drive or, having a volunteering in the community together, that we're doing it together, and then the same thing is that we might have like a potluck after a pre-sanctified service where, again, it allows everyone to show up and pray, because people don't have to worry about going home and making dinner, because we're going to eat as a community. And so I just think there is so much beauty to be said that we are a family in Christ, and really that's how we see a church working. And so how would we support our own family? Well, we prepare them foods, and we do these different things. Well, to do the 3 arms of a fast, we could also look at ways that maybe we're not doing it in community enough, and what can we do there? So I just thought that was...
Yeah, no, I think it goes to the point about the traditioning of this. If we make a real effort to do things like praying together, I hope. I mean, there isn't an Orthodox parish that doesn't have prayer and worship at the heart of what's going on. It doesn't mean that people aren't praying at home. We expect that's happening, but it's almost as an extension of what we do together, right? Yep. And then I love the idea of what you're saying about parishes together taking on the almsgiving responsibility. Again, it doesn't preclude you doing something as well as a family locally, but there's a common thing to that. Well, the fasting and the feasting part needs to be really at the heart of that as well. That almost what we do in families takes its inspiration from and its support from the enthusiasm from the technical information about how to eat well without hurting yourself. All that from a kind of common body. We use this metaphor. St. Paul enjoins us to use the metaphor that we are members of one body. Well, bodies have to stay healthy, and that the only way for the body to stay healthy is for each member to play its part and to support the core of the thing. And I think we need to take this part more seriously. It's almost been left as a kind of individualistic thing, which is so foreign to our Orthodox thinking. Fasting is that thing you do off on your own, and again, it's not about that we need to inquire about each other or judge each other, but that we support each other, that it
Yes.
begins together as a community and then goes
Right.
out from there. And yeah, because I do, as I say, I observe the way people get unhealthy during fasting periods.
Yeah.
I also observe the foods that they bring to a fasting or Lenten, common food table, and I despair sometimes. I almost, when we pray.
Oreos.
Well, yeah, I'm tempted sometimes to pray, Christ God bless the food and drink, and then name the other things that are neither food nor drink. Oreos,
Food-like substances.
Timbits, all these
Oh,
things that I never quite do, but I think
oh.
this doesn't fall in those categories, right?
Yeah.
So,
There is something I would like to say here because I do get this question a lot as well. And, it is such a beautiful thing that, we as Orthodox Christians know we're supposed to pray before we eat. But, it's also beautiful how we're called to pray after we eat. But, when we pray before we eat, we're blessing the food. And so I always tell people, yes, every once in a while, there might be something in a food that you have no clue what it is, and it was made in a lab. But if you're asking God to bless it and it's in your 80-20, 80% of the time you're eating the real deal, 20% of the time, then our bodies physiologically are able to handle that. But we know that prayer blesses everything. And I don't know, maybe one of you know this saint, but I just was, and I want to say it's Saint Nikolai. I don't want to say the wrong one, but from Russia somewhere. And I guess he was trying to, the people were trying to kill him. So they would always put glass in his water. But he would always, before he drank or ate the food that was given to him, he'd always bless it. And nothing was ever happening to him. And,
mm,
finally, I guess they gave him poison as the saint story goes. But I just, I always remind myself that, okay, we don't want to become like idealistic about food because I do see this happening a lot of times, especially during fasting.
yeah.
But recognize that again, prayer sanctifies everything. And that's not to say we could eat whatever we want because that's not, doing what's right either. We kind of can't do that. But I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We could be here until like, this is
I think so.
awesome. Till 12 a.m. in the
No,
morning.
and I think you're right about that. And this isn't at all to promote food as idolatry, although I do put myself in that foodie category. But I think that the key is, as I said earlier, is to make it a habit of life at all times. And a
Mhm.
habit becomes second nature. And a
Yeah.
second nature doesn't have to be an obsession. A second nature is just what you do. You know what goes with something else. You know how to pair foods to get proper, whole proteins and things like that. How to eat seasonally so that you're not breaking the bank, but you're still eating the best of the local
Yes.
produce. You know where to
Yeah.
go and find locally all the good stuff. So that could, all of what I just mentioned can become an obsession and can become idolatrous,
Yeah.
and anything that goes in the place of God is
Yeah.
not so good. But
Yeah.
but I think if we had that community that had the
Mhm.
tradition right and the support right, and people formed these habits, then we would be talking less about food, but just
Yeah.
doing it naturally and raising healthier, happier, less anxious, less stressed, more energy-filled people that could then go
You're
and do
right.
the work of bringing the kingdom to the world, because that's our ultimate goal. That's what
Yes.
we
Yep.
put first. But
Yep.
we're just tired and stressed out and
Yep.
anxious and worn down, and none of us have any energy left over when we eat the Oreos or whatever else that have been, not to necessarily single those out.
Yeah.
They do
No,
seem to be a particularly popular fasting
yeah,
food.
everyone knows it's fasting, that and potato chips. But I just have to really thank you too for bringing this up because it is my secular work, my profession. But I do kind of feel like a lot of times it's not talked enough amongst our community, our faith, our parishes. And what saddens me is that so many times I can blatantly see if someone would just make a small change, they are going to feel more energetic. They're not going to feel so anxious. They're going to be sleeping better. And then, like you said, that just allows them to be better servants to our Lord and King. But the thing is like it is hard for me because it's just not being talked about.
Mm,
And unfortunately, this is where my envy comes in of your country versus ours. This is not even promoted enough through just our medical. I mean, it's hard for people to meet with me and have it covered by insurance, and then it's hard for people to feel like they want to sit down and pay for it because they already pay so much for insurance, and so it's this vicious cycle. But how you're saying, if we could offer this through our communities, our faith-based communities, not only to our parishioners, but to everyone else, it's I don't know, I look at it as a way of serving, multiplying our talents for the Lord. Whereas you have ways to cook. Like you said, so many people just don't know just the basics and how to keep eating healthy, cost effective. Because that's another thing I always hear. In fact, on my website, I did, eating nutritiously and deliciously on a budget. And, there's so many saints that speak to us on how, when we waste things, this is not in correct, keeping our spirit in correct order. But in the same respect, when we're wasting food, that's money we're throwing away. And so people say I don't have enough money to, eat healthfully. But when we look at, decreasing our waste, our food dollars do open up. So I do just feel like this education is so beautiful. So this is important. So this is really an exciting conversation for me.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be that hard to implement. I mean, a lot of churches have something like a commercial kitchen because they do their Sunday, celebrations and
Right.
feasts and that sort of thing. And those are idle, a lot of the
Yeah.
week, and you're embedded in a local community.
Yep.
Often there would be maybe fairly limited, but a fairly high level of skill within a few people within the community. I think it's a runner. And I think if we understood that this is as important as having, youth groups and Bible studies and catechetical groups and everything, that it's not over them, but it's within that whole set of things, and it's just as important and a part of our mission. And for me, it only connects to the things you're talking about. It also has the environmental and climate change aspects to it, and just looking after our care of creation that we're to be stewards of. And I mean, we have Patriarch Bartholomew, beating that drum for many years now, but often people think, well, how can I even participate in that? So beyond me. Well, here's a way, right? Eat, shop, source food locally, and show people how to use that, so that we're not, carting things over thousands of miles in boxes and crates and everything. And it all to me works really well with what our vision for creation and new creation is all about.
I think you said it best, though. If we care for our health with the purpose of being able to serve our communities better, to be able to bring the kingdom to all, kind of like enacting the kingdom, then that's it. You take care of your health so you can be a better servant to the Lord. Okay. Why wouldn't you want to learn?
Right?
Like, why shouldn't we be sharing this stuff more? So I love that.
Well, we are coming very close to the end of the public half of this live stream. We will be continuing, though, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern time over on our Patreon. So Father Jeffrey and I, we have a full podcast publicly, but what not a lot of people know is that we actually do a full private podcast, a full show for only our patrons, for those who choose to support us. And you can go to patreon.com/enacting the kingdom if you'd like to become a patron. Father Jeffrey and I have been doing this for over a year now, so over a year's worth of episodes for only patrons. Also, I'm going to be teasing the audience now with some of the questions I'm going to ask Rita in the private podcast. Okay, so what have you, Rita, personally gotten wrong about fasting in the past? So we'll get real personal there.
Mission time.
Yeah. Do the fasting restrictions of the church need to be updated? The fasting restrictions of the church need to be updated. And then this is my favorite question that I'm looking forward to talking about: is eating an act of prayer? Eating an act of prayer. So if you want to hear Rita's answer to all those questions, you can go again to patreon.com/enacting the kingdom, pick a tier of support and become a patron. And then Father Jeffrey and I will be eternally grateful. But before the end of the public episode, Rita, I do want to ask about a quote of Father Alexander Schmemanns, where he begins the book For the Life of the World with the expression, "You are what you eat." Of course, he's talking, I think, in that context about the Eucharist. But I just wanted.
How many minutes did you say we have left in this?
So
we have that question. We have about 200 pages. So.
You have about 45 seconds. You have about 45 seconds. Maybe we'll make it a yes or no question. Are you what you eat?
Well, yeah. You can't top anything with if you're partaking in the holy gifts, and we're supposed to prepare ourselves to partake in. I mean, that's the whole purpose of attending divine liturgy, right? So I mean, I just feel so unworthy to say that I am what I eat in that sense. But I was thinking about it the other day. The when we really approach the chalice, we are approaching the body and blood of Christ, and he so desires to unite himself to us through this act. It's just, I was in the line, I'm like, I think I should get out. I don't know if I'm ready for this, because it's just so humbling to see that. So, but yeah, I guess that's not even the answer, but we went a roundabout way. But
Hey, it's all good. Well, thank you so much, Rita. Thank you, Father Jeffrey. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners. We're going to take a 15-minute break. And for all our patrons watching, we will re-up on Patreon in 15 minutes. We'll see you then.
Bye for now.